Okay, welcome to Chapter 35 in the Practices book. This is about centralization overview on page 639. Basically, it's talking about how you would organize your IT structure, whether or not you're going to keep everything tightly controlled at the top, or you're going to decentralize. It's a pretty decent discussion. So, just as an introduction, by the way, this is a very sensitive topic. There's an awful lot of people that have very strong opinions on this. And so, you can't overdo this. I mean, you can decentralize when you shouldn't, and you can centralize when you shouldn't. I mean, you really kind of need to be paying attention. So basically, there's three models to this thing. A centralized model, which everything is controlled at headquarters. We know best. And everyone uses the same system, and it's all controlled by one organization. An email system would be a good example of that. I mean, everyone in the organization really ought to be using the same email system, right? And there's no need for, let's say you got 5 locations across the U.S. There's no need for each 5 of those to be running their own email system. That doesn't make any sense. Decentralized is, each department or section or state or location manages their own stuff locally. And, power to the people, provides a lot of flexibility and all that. But, as long as it's something that doesn't really have to have, some central overarching thing like email. And the distributed one, whether you have a single standard, but you just deploy that standard everywhere, and it's kind of still centrally managed. It's just that you've pushed it physically down. So you have email servers in the 5 locations, but they're still being managed by the one person or the team at the top. Okay, so you might think that the whole idea of the centralization may be talking about organizational structure. Well, okay, but you could have one particular organization where this service is centralized and this service is not. We're not talking about everything being all centralized, all or nothing. So your organizational structure may not actually match this model because you can mix and match between the models that you need. So, top only, everyone happens at the top. Bottom only, everyone does their own thing. And then top controlled is, okay, you physically have the server at your location, but we're still going to control it. Okay, so centralization works well in a lot of scenarios. Software, like email servers, that would make a lot of sense, right? Security requirements. That's a very, very specialized skill. Would you like to have, if you had 5 locations across the U.S., would you like to have one security person in each one of the 5 locations? Or would you like to have a central headquarters that had 5 security people? I really want to have, that's a very, very specialized skill. I'd really want to have all 5 of them located in one location. Yeah, because there's going to be strengths and weaknesses among the 5, right? That way people can go on vacation without worrying about their little kingdom being exposed, okay? And then organizational wide. I mean, for example, the Army is really about centralization. They're really keen on organization structures. And so even if it doesn't make any sense, by God, we're gonna have that chain of command kind of a thing. Okay, all right. So, rationales for reorganization on page 640. So, IT costs a lot. I mean, it's a significant amount of money. So, most of the time, if there's going to be some sort of reorganization, it's probably going to be some sort of cost-cutting thing, where I could have, instead of having 5 people, 1 at each location, maybe I can get away with only having 4 if we centralized it. Because those guys aren't working. They're only working 80% of the time in each one of those 5 locations. So if I combine them together, I can save some money. That's one of the ways of thinking about it. Sometimes it's done completely by, like, for example, security. It's got nothing to do with money. It has to do with, I need a central pool of some talent that I really cannot have when it's scattered about. One of the things about reorganization into a central thing is, the end user support. That really is what drives satisfaction. Okay, it doesn't matter how you organize. That's being reorganized is not going to make your users any happier. So what they want is someone to speak their language, and they want fast response. And so that doesn't necessarily mean centralized or decentralized, but I'm just saying that from a customer's point of view, they don't really care. All they want is somebody responsive. They want somebody to talk to. They want their problem solved in a hurry. Okay. For centralization, the pros, it is more efficient. I mean, clearly, if you had 80% of the time used at each of the 5 locations, I could probably get away with having 4. Okay. So reduce duplication of effort. That makes sense. Improve quality. It basically encourages specialization. If everyone in the 5 locations, every person has to do the exact same thing, there's no time for somebody to go, hey, Bob, why don't you become our Active Directory guy? And they go, okay, sure, I'll go to school, I'll get a certificate. And so if you guys have some really sticky questions on how to do something, it'll allow you to specialize because you've got enough people to do it. If you're a one-only shop, you're the only one in the shop, you're never going to be able to specialize with anything. Okay. And then decentralization. So often this happens because like merger and acquisition, you acquired some company and so, your structure doesn't match theirs and so you're going to have to do something about it. You might want to break away from a central organization for several reasons. One of them is low quality. In other words, we know our stuff better than those people at the headquarters. No one knows it better than us. And so, they can't really help us. That'd be one reason. Needs not met. The folks at the headquarters only do this, but we need more than that. We want this, this, and this. Okay, that'd be another good reason. Lack of customization. We're not like the other organizations. Our building and our structure and our mission here in Texas is radically different than the ones in Michigan. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need custom work. And then cost. A lot of people think, well, that centralized thing cost an awful lot. That, by the way, that was the exact same excuse we used to justify centralization, was because it cost less. But let me just tell you, when people see the bill for centralized, whatever it is you're talking about, they go, oh my goodness, that's a heck of a lot of money. Well, it is. But if they try to do it themselves, they're not thinking about, all the rest of the secondary costs. They're just talking about salaries mostly. And then, what if the speed at which we innovate at our location is different. I want new things, and I just can't wait for the headquarters to catch up. They're always like 2 or 3 years behind, and I need more cutting edge kind of stuff. So that would be a good reason to centralize. But they caution you, don't ever get one of those "we'll do it alone" thing. Like we don't need you at all. We'll do everything on our own. Ooh boy, you set yourself up with some liability issues, particularly if there's an issue with security, like if there's a break and they go in and say, well, have you been following the corporate policies? And they go, what corporate policies? What are you talking about? Yeah, that would be bad. Okay. So the Army, by the way, I'm telling stories that are getting kind of old now, and maybe they've changed, but it doesn't matter because the story was relevant at the time. So back in, around year 2000, the Army decided to get away from Windows NT and go to Active Directory. Yay! And so they went to go talk to the Microsoft folks and said, okay, we're going to establish an Active Directory domain for everybody, and this is all going to work. And they said, oh, great, so you're going to have every installation will have their own domain? And they went, what? No! We're the Army, by God. We're going to have army.mil, and that's going to be it. And the folks at Microsoft went, really? You're going to have a couple 100,000? Okay, I made those numbers up. But, you're going to have 800, different servers on here and all in one giant domain, all held at one location, one giant domain for the entire Army. So, Fort Hood is not its own domain. And they went, yeah, that's exactly what they want. And, of course, the Microsoft guys were going, geez, this is the exact opposite of what we tell people on how to do this. Okay, so yes, they went their own way. So Fort Hood is just an organizational unit in a giant domain. Wow, that's the way they put it together. Not bright, not smart. And because they had to have so many helpers, okay, they had to have helpers at headquarters and helpers at each one of these little organizations, it turned out that we looked to see how many accounts were in the administrator account. okay, in the administrator group. And so it was over 100 people had administrator rights to my machine. Over 100. Now, the vast majority of them weren't here locally. They were elsewhere. But I have a problem with that. If you have 100 people that have access to my machine, that's just not the way it's supposed to work. Okay. And so there's a shaded area there on page 641, talked about quality drives adoption. So a company came in and said, hey, we want to do managed PC services. All you have to do is we'll charge you a monthly fee, and we'll buy the PCs for you. We'll set them up. We'll keep them maintained. We'll even do the 3-year replacement cycle, the whole thing. And all you have to do is just pay a fee. And some looked at it and went, wait a minute, we've got graduate students that are essentially free. And they can do all this stuff. So why on earth should I pay when I have free labor that I can use to do this thing? And so they were kind of balked at the idea. And then finally they realized, there's a difference between having highly paid, or not paid, highly trained individuals doing this versus, a new graduate assistant every couple months. Yeah. And besides, it freed up the graduate assistants to do their real jobs. And so most of them kind of fell into the line, well, okay, you're right. This whole centralized idea of managed PC services actually makes a little bit of sense. On page 642, they talk about approaches and hybrids. So centralization is really about the focus of control. Who has control? Okay? That's basically what it's about. And that's great for security because, again, highly specialized stuff. And not everybody has the quality, that has the gumps to do this. It's just tough. Okay. So perhaps you would start with the idea, let's do centralization everywhere, and then we'll have some exceptions. Okay. In other words, start with, okay, everything will be centralized, and if I do centralize, it's going to be for some well-defined, justified reason. Cool. So they start talking about 4 different models. A strictly centralized service, and that means everything, okay? It's run by a central group. The customers interact directly with the headquarters. They don't call if you're at the Texas location, you don't call anybody at the Texas location. You call the people in the headquarters, wherever that is. And so payroll will be a good example of that. One payroll system for the entire company. One email system for the entire company. One internet setup, and one authentication setup, and one voice over IP setup. All those things that are kind of common. Yeah, that ought to be managed by one organization at one location. Doesn't need any specialization, doesn't need any tweaking at local levels. Okay? And then centralized platform. That's essentially the same, except that you have a choice. Centralized platform means the services are offered, but they're not mandatory. And so a good example would be like, hey, we have a system so that we can back up your home directories for you. Do you want that? And so the people in Minnesota go, yeah, I think that's a great idea. We'll opt to do that. The people in Texas go, nah, we don't need that. So it's all centrally managed. It's just whether or not you apply it or not. It's optional. Centralized with delegation. Okay, it's still kind of sort of handled at the top, but I send people down or train people or wave a magic wand over them and say, okay, you are now delegated to perform these tasks for me. Okay, so hardcore stuff is still centralized, but provides some sort of on-site staff at remote locations to do the user-related things. Now, it could be that it's all funded by the headquarters. That would be one way of doing it. In fact, that's probably the best way of doing it, because if they're funded by each individual organization, then they're going to steal them away to go do other things. So if we're funded by the headquarters but physically located, that would be a good example of centralized and delegation. Hey, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.